The church had no marquee sign. It never had. Reverend Marcus Cole had been asked about it every year for the last 19 years by congregation members and by the Cresswell City Tourism Board and by 2 different journalists who had come to write features about historic black institutions in the parish. He had told all of them the same thing each time. The people who belong here know where it is. The people who need to find it will find it. A sign is for people who are passing through. This congregation is not passing through. Calvary Cross Baptist Church had stood on the corner of Burden Street and 19th Avenue in Cresswell, Louisiana since 1894. The building itself had been rebuilt twice, once in 1912 and once in 1947, but the foundation was original. The cornerstone had been placed by men whose names were written in the registry that sat in a glass case in the foyer in the specific brown ink of time, the names of people who had decided that this particular corner was the corner where they would plant themselves. Marcus Cole had been planting himself on that corner for 19 years. He was 63 years old. He was a tall man who held himself with the particular posture of someone who has spent decades behind a pulpit and in front of congregations and in city council chambers and in the offices of people who needed to be reminded of what they had committed to in writing. He kept his head level. He spoke slowly. He had learned early that the slower he spoke, the more carefully people listened, and he had built that lesson into the pace of everything he did. He had grown up 3 blocks from this church. His grandmother, Adeline Cole, had been baptized in the original building in 1931. She had walked past this corner every morning for 27 years on her way to and from the commercial laundry on Marchetti Street, where she worked pressing other people's clothes, and she had known every name on the deacon board because those names had been her neighbors, and because in the Cresswell of her lifetime, knowing who sat on the deacon board of the church on your corner was the same as knowing who was holding up the neighborhood. His father had served on the deacon board of this rebuilt building for 22 years. Marcus had attended Sunday school in the basement and had been in trouble in that Sunday school on 6 separate occasions, that he could still enumerate specifically the chalk incident, and the broken window, and the 4 others, and his grandmother had known about each of them before he arrived home, because Adeline Cole existed in a network of information that operated at a speed that Marcus had never been able to fully account for. He was not by any standard measure a famous man. He had not appeared on national television. He had not published a book. He had not been the subject of a documentary or a profile in a magazine that people outside Louisiana had heard of. His congregation numbered 412 active members. His church was on a corner that did not appear in the tourist materials for Cresswell because Cresswell did not have tourist materials for this neighborhood, and because no one had ever thought of this corner as a destination, except the people who had always known it was one. He did not require any of that. He had built something else. He had built the specific kind of authority that does not appear on a resume or in a newspaper, and does not photograph well and cannot be awarded at a ceremony, the authority that comes from being present in the same place, doing the same things for long enough that the place and the things and the person become inseparable in the understanding of the people who live nearby. In Cresswell, when someone said the Reverend, they meant one person. In 4 of the last 7 city council elections, candidates had come to Marcus Cole before they announced not to ask for his endorsement, but because there was a category of knowledge about this neighborhood that you could only get from someone who had been there for 19 years and paid attention the whole time. Some of them had been endorsed. Some of them had not. All of them had been spoken to directly and honestly and had left the conversation understanding more than they had entered it with. That was what Marcus Cole built. He had left Cresswell at 18 on a partial academic scholarship to Morehouse College in Atlanta. He had returned at 24 with his bachelor's degree and a master's degree from the Atlanta University Center and a draft of his first sermon written in a spiral notebook that he still kept in the bottom drawer of the desk in his office off the sanctuary. The draft was 12 pages long and had been revised 14 times before he delivered it. And when he delivered it, his grandmother was in the 3rd pew on the left, which was the pew she had occupied every Sunday for 40 years, and she had sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened with the particular quality of attention that people give things they have been waiting for. He had served this congregation since then, 19 years, 217 baptisms, 102 marriages, 149 funerals. He had presided over all of them with the same slow, deliberate pace, because he had understood early that the pace of his presence was the thing people carried with them afterward. Not the specific words. The quality of the room he made. He had organized the congregation's response to 4 flood events in the parish. He had coordinated the neighborhood's recovery from 2 fires on Burden Street, including the fire of 2015 that had taken 4 homes and left 11 families without their things. He had been the primary voice for the congregation in the zoning dispute of 2017, when the city had proposed reclassifying 3 blocks of Burden Street, including the church property, for commercial development. He had fought that dispute through 4 years of documentation and public comment submissions, and a legal challenge, and a GoFundMe campaign, and 5 consecutive Sunday services, during which the congregation contributed what they could toward the legal fees. He had won the dispute in 2021. The food pantry had been his. It was not the congregation's most visible work. It was not the program that made it into the Courier's annual community roundup or the mayor's office annual report on social services. It was simply a table on the sidewalk outside the church on the 3rd Thursday of every month, set up at 10 in the morning and broken down by noon, from which the congregation distributed canned goods and dry goods and fresh produce when they had it, and personal care items when they could source them. It had started in 2012 with 4 tables and 23 community members. By 2023, it served between 80 and 120 people each month and had distributed, by Marcus's careful estimate, maintained in a ledger in the church office, more than 12,000 individual supply packages over its 11 years. The permit for the distribution was filed annually with the Cresswell City Parks and Public Spaces Office. The current permit had been renewed in January. The confirmation letter from the city recorder's office was paper-clipped to the front of the laminated permit document that Marcus kept in the top drawer of his desk. The food pantry was his idea and his insistence, and he would not allow anyone to call it a charity. He called it a practice. He had said this from the first month in 2012, when the table had gone up on the sidewalk for the first time with 4 folding tables and 23 families, and a small sign that said, "Calvary Cross Community Distribution, 3rd Thursday. All welcome." He had told the deacon board before the first distribution, "We are not doing this because people need it. We are doing this because we need to do it." A congregation that does not practice what it gathers to discuss is not a congregation. It is an audience. The distribution was part of what Calvary Cross Baptist Church was. It was not a program. It was not a service. It was simply something they did on the 3rd Thursday of every month, the way they gathered on Sunday mornings and met for Bible study on Wednesday evenings. It was part of the rhythm of the place, and the rhythm of the place was part of what made this corner what it was. Marcus had been asked twice by 2 different foundation officers to apply for formal grant funding to scale the distribution into a larger operation with a dedicated facility and expanded staff. He had thanked them both. He had not applied. He had told the deacon board, "If we put this in a building, we lose the corner. And this is a corner congregation. We have always been a corner congregation." The table stayed on the sidewalk. On the 3rd Thursday of October at 9:44 in the morning, he carried a box of distribution supplies through the front door of the church and down the stone steps to begin the setup. Sister Mavis Tatum was behind him. She was 71 years old. She had been a member of this congregation for 49 years. She had known Marcus's grandmother. She had been part of the food pantry since its first month, and she arrived every 3rd Thursday at 9:30 with 2 bags of canned goods that she had purchased herself and would not accept reimbursement for. And she carried them with the careful deliberateness of a woman who has been carrying things for other people her entire life, and has decided that this is simply what hands are for. Marcus set the box on the top step while he held the door behind him. He said, "Sister Mavis, I have those." She said, "Reverend, I have been carrying heavier than this since before you were a thought." He did not argue with her. He went back inside for the second box. Officer Brendan Hosch pulled his patrol car to the curb on Burden Street at 9:47 in the morning. He was 36 years old and 11 years with the Creswell Police Department, which was long enough to have developed a specific set of habits that had never produced a consequence sufficient to interrupt them. He had 3 complaints in his personnel file. 2 had been filed by black residents. One from a family whose teenage son had been stopped and questioned on the walk home from school in 2020. An incident in which Hosch had detained the boy for 14 minutes before releasing him without citation or explanation. And one from a business owner on Benton Avenue whose storefront had been cited for an exterior display ordinance violation that did not exist in the applicable code. A citation that had been dismissed by the municipal court in 5 minutes when the business owner produced the relevant code section. The third complaint was from a Latino community member who had attended a neighborhood association meeting at which Hosch was a presenter and who had filed a written complaint regarding statements Hosch made during the public comment portion of the meeting. All 3 had been classified as inconclusive and closed without disciplinary action. The teenager's parents had appealed the classification. The appeal had been reviewed and denied. Hosch had received a community engagement commendation from Chief Morales the previous March at a ceremony where someone had taken a photograph and it had appeared in the department's quarterly newsletter. He sat in the patrol car for a moment after pulling to the curb, looking at the box on the church steps. He looked at the man on the steps. He looked at the ministerial collar on the man's shirt. He registered none of it as information that changed the category he had already assigned. He looked at the man who had just come back through the front door with a second box. He got out of the car. He said, "Sir." Marcus Cole turned. He looked at the officer. He was aware of the temperature of the October morning, which was cool and clear and carried the particular quality of Louisiana October air, the season's first real coolness after the long heat. He was aware of the weight of the supply box in his arms. He was aware that Hosch was young, and that the certainty in his voice was the kind that has not yet been tested in a meaningful way. He said, "Good morning, officer. I am Reverend Marcus Cole. I am the minister of Calvary Cross Baptist Church." He gestured toward the building behind him. He said, "We are setting up for our monthly food pantry distribution. We run it on the 3rd Thursday of each month. The permit for the distribution is on file with the city." Hosch said, "Sir, you are blocking the public right-of-way." Marcus said, "The box is on the step, which is church property." Hosch said, "The step is adjacent to the public right-of-way and constitutes a potential obstruction to pedestrian access." Marcus said, "The step has been used as the staging area for this distribution for 11 years. The distribution permit is filed with the City Parks and Public Spaces office." Hosch said, "I need to see the permit document before you continue." Marcus said, "The permit document is inside. I will retrieve it." He went inside. He set down the box he was carrying in the foyer and went to his office and opened the top drawer and took out the laminated permit document with the confirmation letter paper-clipped to the front. He had retrieved this document before on 3 occasions in 11 years when someone had questioned the distribution's authorization, and each time the document had been sufficient. He expected it to be sufficient again. He went back out. Sister Mavis was still on the steps. She had positioned herself near the box with her 2 bags of canned goods and was watching Officer Hosch with an expression that was not hostile but was not conciliatory either. It was the expression of a woman who has been a witness to a great number of situations over 71 years and has developed a very specific diagnostic capacity for recognizing which kind of situation she is in. Hosch had said something to her while Marcus was inside. Mavis said to Marcus when he returned, "He told me to move the bags." Marcus looked at Hosch. He said, "I have the permit document." He handed it to Hosch. Hosch took it. He read it the way people read things when they have already decided the document will not resolve the situation they have defined for themselves. His eyes moved across the text with the thoroughness of someone building a case rather than seeking information. He looked up. He said, This permit covers distribution activities on the adjacent sidewalk. It does not specifically authorize use of the church steps as part of the staging and setup area. Marcus said, "The staging area is part of the distribution operation. The distribution operation is authorized by the permit." Hosch said, "That interpretation is not supported by the permit language." Marcus said, "Officer Hosch, the permit language authorizes the food pantry distribution of Calvary Cross Baptist Church. The staging on the steps is part of how the distribution operates. We have conducted it this way for 11 years. Hosch said 11 years of practice does not override the specific language of the permit. Marcus said, "The specific language of the permit authorizes the operation. The operation includes staging." There was a pause. Hosch said, "Sir, I need you to remove the items from the steps until this can be clarified." Marcus said, "I am not going to remove the items from the steps. We have 80 to 120 community members arriving in approximately 35 minutes. The distribution begins at 10 o'clock. Hosch said, "Sir, I understand that. But I cannot allow a distribution to proceed when there is a question about the authorization." Marcus said, "There is no question about the authorization. You have the permit in your hand." Hosch said, "There is a question about the steps." He said it with the flat, patient certainty of a man who has decided that a question exists and will not be persuaded by any argument that the question does not. Inside, Marcus felt something that was not quite anger, but was in its vicinity. It was the specific sensation that arrives when you encounter the particular form of institutional obstruction that cannot be reasoned with because it is not based on reason. He had encountered this sensation before, in the zoning dispute, in budget hearings, in conversations with city officials who had decided something and presented their decision as a procedural concern. He knew the shape of it. He breathed. He said, "I am going to stand here while you contact whoever you need to contact to resolve your question." Hosch said, "Sir, I need you to step back." Marcus said, "I am standing on the steps of my church." Hosch reached for his radio. The call he placed was the same language Hosch used for all institutional communication, measured flat, professionally neutral. Subject on-site potential ordinance violation request. Second unit for situational support. The words performed impartiality while describing a minister on the steps of his own church on a permitted distribution morning. Sister Mavis had not moved her bags. Behind Marcus, the front door of the church had opened again. 3 additional congregation members had come out, 2 women and a young man carrying more supply boxes and a folding table for the sidewalk setup. They stopped on the threshold when they saw the patrol car and the officer and the body language of the scene. One of the women was Janelle Watkins. She was 26. She had grown up in this congregation, baptized here at 11, confirmed at 16, and had returned to Cresswell 3 years ago after 4 years of community organizing work in New Orleans with a housing advocacy organization that worked with flood-displaced families. She had come back to Cresswell because Marcus had called her and told her that the congregation needed someone who knew how to work with city offices, and she had said she would think about it, and she had thought about it for 2 weeks, and then driven back down from New Orleans with everything she owned in a rented pickup truck. She was the person who filed the permit renewals. She was the person who attended the city council public comment sessions on the congregation's behalf. She was the person who knew Chapter 4, Section 12. Not because she had memorized the municipal code in its entirety, but because she had spent 3 years in the specific kind of work that requires you to know the exact location of every possible obstacle before someone puts it in front of you. She had read Chapter 4, Section 12 in February when another community organization in the city had been cited under it incorrectly, and she had researched the section to understand whether Calvary Cross was at risk. She knew the section. She knew it did not apply to them. She knew the moment Hosch cited it that the citation was wrong. She had pulled out her phone. She knew the permit for the distribution. She had filed the renewal herself in January. She pulled out her phone again and held it steady. Hosch said, "Ma'am, put the phone away." She said, "I am within my rights to record this interaction, officer." He said, "I'm asking you to put it away." She said, "I'm not going to do that." He said, "Ma'am, I will not repeat myself." She said, "Then do not repeat yourself." She held the phone steady. She had been holding phones steady in confrontational situations for 4 years in New Orleans, and she understood in the specific and practical way that comes from 4 years of experience that a recording is only as useful as its stability. A shaking camera tells the viewer the holder was afraid. A steady one tells the viewer something else. She held it the way she held everything she was determined to carry through with both hands at a consistent angle without moving. Hosch turned back to Marcus. He said, "Sir, this is a private property situation, and I need to determine the full extent of the authorization before any activities can proceed." Marcus said, "The full extent of the authorization is in the document you are holding." Hosch said, "The document does not cover all elements of the current setup," Marcus said. "Then I need you to tell me specifically with ordinance reference what element of the setup you believe is not covered, because I have been conducting this distribution under continuous valid authorization for 11 years, and I am not aware of any element that requires additional coverage," Hosch said. Chapter 4, Section 12 of the Creswell Municipal Code regarding obstruction of public access. Marcus said, Chapter 4. Section 12 applies to commercial businesses conducting activity that impedes pedestrian flow on public sidewalks. This is a non-profit food pantry distribution on private church property. The section does not apply. Hosch stared at him. The ordinance had come back at him with specificity and precision, and he had not expected that, and his expression showed a brief flash of the recalculation that happens when a situation does not proceed as the established pattern requires. He said, "Sir, I need you to step back from the entrance and allow me to conduct my assessment," Marcus said. "You are welcome to conduct your assessment. I will stand here." He stepped to the right side of the top step. He placed his hands behind his back. He waited. He thought of his grandmother. Adeline Cole had walked past this corner every morning of her working life, the entire 27 years of it, and she had known this building before. It was this building had known the people who had decided this corner was worth building on. She had taught Marcus what it meant to stand on this corner, not by instruction, but by example, by the way she placed her feet when she stopped on her way home on Friday evenings and spoke to whoever was on the steps. He placed his feet the same way. The second officer arrived 8 minutes later. Derek Pell was 41 years old and 17 years with the department. He was Hosch's senior in time served, though not in current situation, and he approached the scene with the specific assessment of a man who had been called to assist and was now trying to quickly understand what he had been called into. He looked at the permit in Hosch's hand. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the crowd that had begun to gather at the edge of the sidewalk, people from the neighborhood who came every third Thursday and who had now arrived to find a patrol car and 2 officers at the church steps. He said, "What is the situation?" Hosch said, "Possible ordinance violation, unauthorized use of property adjacent to public right-of-way." Pell said, "What ordinance?" Hosch said, Chapter 4, Section 12. Pell looked at the permit. He said, "Sir, how long has this distribution been operating?" Marcus said, 11 years, every third Thursday. Pell said, "And the city has been aware." Marcus said, "The city issued the permit. The current permit was renewed in January of this year. What you are holding is the authorized document for this distribution." Pell looked at Hosch. Something moved across Pell's face, a brief assessment of the situation and his position in it. The kind of calculation that experienced officers make when they arrive at a situation that has been initiated by a colleague and realize that the situation is not what the colleague's framing suggested. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Janelle's phone. He looked at the permit. He said nothing. He stepped back. He let Hosch continue. What happened next took 14 minutes. Hosch informed Marcus that the staging of distribution materials on the church steps, even in preparation for an activity on the adjacent sidewalk, constituted use of property adjacent to the public right-of-way in a manner that required specific municipal authorization beyond the distribution permit. Marcus said that was incorrect. Hosch said that Marcus's interpretation was not the controlling interpretation. Marcus asked who held the controlling interpretation. Hosch said the municipality held the controlling interpretation. Marcus said, "Then get me someone from the municipality." Hosch said, "Sir, I am representing the municipality." Marcus said, "Officer Hosch." Chapter 4. Section 12 has a specific definition of commercial activity that makes it inapplicable to this situation. I can recite the definition to you. Would you like me to do that? Hosch said that is not necessary. Marcus said I believe it might be. He recited the definition. He said it from memory slowly, with the pace of a man who learned it not for this moment, but because he had learned through 4 years of a zoning dispute that the only protection against institutional language is a more precise command of institutional language than the person wielding it against you. The definition took 40 seconds. Hosch said nothing for 6 seconds. Then he said, "Sir, regardless of the ordinance question, you are failing to comply with a lawful officer direction." Marcus said, "I am asking you to identify what lawful officer direction you have issued that is supported by the applicable code." Hosch said, "I need you to remove the materials from the steps." Marcus said, "That direction has no legal basis, as I have demonstrated. I am not going to follow a direction that has no legal basis." Hosch said, "Sir, non-compliance with an officer direction is itself a violation regardless of the underlying basis of the direction." Marcus said, "That is an incorrect statement of the law." He said it without raising his voice. He said it the way he said things when he was completely certain of them. Quietly, clearly, without the energy of argument, because certainty does not require that energy. Hosch said, "Sir, I am asking for the last time." He said it with the weight of a man who had used the phrase last time as a transition to action in 9 prior situations and for whom it had always worked, and who therefore believed it would work again. Marcus said, "Then this is the last time I will tell you. I am not removing the materials from the steps of my church." He said, "I'm standing here." He said, "I will continue standing here." He said it without aggression and without defiance, the way you say things when they are simply the truth, and the truth requires no performance. The crowd at the edge of the sidewalk had grown. By 10:11, there were 47 people gathered. Some of them were distribution regulars who arrived every 3rd Thursday with their bags. Some were neighbors who had come out of their houses when they saw the patrol car. Some were congregation members who had received texts from Janelle during the exchange. They stood quietly. They watched. Marcus was aware of them. He was aware of the specific weight of being watched in this way, not as a spectacle, but as a person who was being witnessed. He had been witnessed before in city council hearings in the courtroom during the zoning dispute in the 5 Sunday services, where he had asked his congregation for money he was not sure they had. He understood what it meant to have people watching because they needed to see what you did. He understood that what you do in those moments is not for yourself. It is for everyone watching who will carry it into the situation waiting for them around the next corner. The situation that has not yet arrived, where they will need to know that this particular kind of standing is possible. He stood. He stood for them. He looked at the magnolia tree at the corner of the church property. It had been planted in 1961 by a group of deacons whose names were in the registry. It was 62 years old. It had outlasted the people who planted it by 4 decades. Hosch produced his handcuffs. The sound of the cuffs opening was small in the October morning, metal on metal, a sound that carries its meaning without announcement regardless of the volume it arrives at. He said, "Sir, I am detaining you for questioning regarding failure to comply with a lawful officer direction and obstruction of a municipal officer in the performance of his duties." A sound went through the crowd. Not a word. A sound. The particular involuntary response that happens in people when they see something cross a threshold they recognized before they could have named it. Marcus Cole looked at the handcuffs. He did not move backward. He did not raise his hands. He said, "Officer Hosch, before you proceed, I want you to hear one thing clearly." He said, "Every person on this sidewalk is a witness to what is happening on these steps. The recording that has been running since you asked my congregation member to put her phone away has captured everything spoken here. What you are doing has a name, and it will be named." Hosch stepped forward. He said, "Sir, put your hands behind your back." Marcus put his hands behind his back. He did not resist. He stood completely still while Hosch placed the handcuffs. He thought of his grandmother. He thought of the Sunday school in the basement and the 6 occasions of trouble and Adeline knowing about each of them before he arrived home. He thought of her walking this block for 27 years with her hands full of other people's laundry and her head up, always up, because she had told him once that when your hands are full you have to carry the dignity in your posture. He looked at the magnolia tree. He thought of the 1894 cornerstone and the names in the registry and the 130 years of people who had decided this corner was the corner worth holding. He was holding it. He breathed. He thought, I am fine. He thought, this is going to be fine. He was not afraid. He had been in situations that required what fear would steal before through the zoning dispute and the legal challenge and the Sunday services where he had asked his congregation for money toward a legal fight. They did not know they would win. He had learned in those years that fear is a signal and not a verdict, that you feel it clearly, and you acknowledge it clearly, and then you put it somewhere that will not interfere with your posture, because your posture is what the people watching are going to carry home with them. And what they carry home with them is what they bring back the following month and the month after that. He placed the fear where it would not interfere. He thought about the registry in the foyer. He thought about the names in brown ink. He thought about the men who had laid the cornerstone in 1894 on a corner in Louisiana that was not in 1894 a corner where they had many friends in the municipal government. They had laid the cornerstone anyway. He thought of that cornerstone. He thought of it beneath the foundation, beneath the building, behind his back. He placed his feet firmly on the step above it. He was not afraid. Sister Mavis Tatum had not moved. She was standing at the edge of the top step with her 2 bags of canned goods. She was watching Hosch with the expression of a woman who has seen what she has seen and has named it precisely and is not going to pretend she has not seen it. She said quietly to no one in particular, to everyone in general, Lord, have mercy on this block today. The crowd had gone very still. 47 people, the October morning. The handcuffed minister on the steps of the church his family had attended for 90 years. Janelle had not lowered the phone. Officer Pell was at the bottom of the steps. He was looking at the sidewalk. He was doing the arithmetic again, the calculation about the situation and his position in it, and this time the arithmetic had a different character, because the minister was in handcuffs, and the crowd was very still, and the phone was recording, and Pell had 17 years, and he understood things about situations that Hosch had not yet had 17 years to understand. He looked up. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Hosch. He said, Brendan. Hosch said, subject is detained for questioning. Pell said, Brendan. Hosch did not respond to the second one. Pell looked at the crowd. He looked at the phone. He looked at the permit in Hosch's hand. He said nothing further. A man came through the edge of the crowd on the left side. He was 78 years old. He wore a dark blazer over a collared shirt and dark slacks, the clothes of a man who goes out in the morning prepared to be recognized. Not because he requires recognition, but because, after 14 years as the mayor of a city, the clothes that say prepared become the clothes you reach for without thinking. He moved through the crowd the way men of a certain age and a certain history move through crowds, without hurry, without announcement, but with the specific quality of presence that makes a path open before it is requested. His name was Nathaniel Reeves. He had been the mayor of Cresswell from 2004 to 2018, 14 years, across 4 elections, through 2 recessions, and 3 major storms, and the city's long and complicated negotiation with a shipping company that had wanted to rezone the eastern waterfront. He had won the zoning fight. It had taken him 4 years and 2 legal challenges and the specific patience of a man who understood that the bureaucratic record is the most powerful instrument in a city government, more powerful than any speech or press conference, because it is what the courts look at. He had not run for a 3rd term. He had told his wife that he had done what he had set out to do and that 14 years was enough and that he was tired in the way that public service tires people, not in the body, but in the specific organ that processes the distance between what is possible and what gets done. He had retired to a house 4 blocks from Calvary Cross Baptist Church because he had grown up 6 blocks from this corner, and he had spent his career in City Hall, and he wanted to spend whatever came after in the neighborhood that had formed him. He attended the 3rd Thursday distribution every month. He had done so for 4 years, since the month that Constance Ballard had told him about the food pantry at a community meeting, and he had said, "Why have I not been there?" And she had said, "Because no one invited you," and he had said, "I am inviting myself." He had been carrying canned goods to this corner every 3rd Thursday since. He had been walking to the community center 2 blocks away on this particular Thursday morning when he turned onto Burden Street and saw the patrol car at the curb and the officer at the steps. He had stopped. He had watched for 3 minutes. He was 78 years old, and he had been watching situations for 78 years, and he knew what he was watching. He had seen the handcuffs come out. He walked forward. He walked through the crowd. He walked up to the bottom of the steps. He stood there for 1 moment and looked at Marcus in the handcuffs and looked at Hosch and looked at Pell at the bottom of the steps and took in the specific configuration of the situation with the efficiency of someone who has spent 14 years reading rooms. He said, "Brendan." He said it once quietly. His voice was the voice of a man who has spent 14 years in rooms where a single word said in the right tone changes what the room does next. Hosch turned. He looked at the older man. He did not immediately register who he was looking at. He said, "Sir, this is an active." Nathaniel Reeves said, "Son." 1 word. He said, "I know Marcus Cole. I have known him for 30 years. I was in this building the Sunday after the zoning ruling came back. I sat in the 3rd pew." He said, "I am looking at a man in handcuffs on the steps of his own church on a distribution morning, and I am looking at a permit that was issued by the city this January, and I need you to explain to me right now, with ordinance reference, what legal basis you have for what I am seeing." Hosch said, "Sir, Chapter 4, Section 12. Reeves said, "Chapter 4. Section 12 covers commercial businesses blocking sidewalk access. This is a non-profit food distribution on private church property. That section does not apply, and I believe you know it does not apply." He said, "I am also going to tell you that Harold Sims from the city recorder's office attends this distribution every 3rd Thursday, and Harold will be here in approximately 6 minutes, and Harold authorized the permit renewal for this distribution in January, and Harold has 12 years of knowing exactly what permits he has issued and what they cover." Hosch said, "Sir, I am operating within my—" Reeves said, "Brendan." He said it with a quality that was not anger and was not a threat and was something older and more durable than either. He said, "Remove the handcuffs." He said, "And then I need you to call Chief Morales because she and I are going to have a conversation before noon today about what happened on these steps, and it would be better for everyone involved if that conversation started from a position of correction rather than escalation." Pell moved. He was behind Marcus before Hosch had fully processed the sentence. He said, "I'm going to remove these, Reverend. Hold still." He removed the handcuffs. Marcus Cole brought his hands forward. He rubbed his wrists once gently. He looked at Nathaniel Reeves. He said, "Nathaniel." Reeves said, "Marcus." He held Marcus's gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Hosch. He did not say anything to Hosch. He stepped up to the top step and stood beside Marcus. Beside him. Not in front of him. Not speaking for him. Beside him. The crowd saw it. Harold Sims arrived at 10:24. He was 57 city recorder for 12 years, a congregation member for longer than that. He came around the corner with his canvas tote bag of distribution goods and saw the patrol car and stopped and then walked forward. And when he reached the bottom of the steps, he looked at Marcus and looked at Hosch and looked at the permit Hosch was still holding, and he said, "What in the world?" He listened to the situation summary for 45 seconds. Then he said, "Officer, my name is Harold Sims. I am the city recorder of Cresswell. That permit was renewed by my office in January. I authorized it. The distribution activities of Calvary Cross Baptist Church are authorized by that permit, including staging operations on church property." Chapter 4. Section 12 does not apply to nonprofit operations on private property, and you know it. He said, "There is no ordinance violation here. There was never an ordinance violation here. This minister was handcuffed on the steps of his own church on a distribution morning under a valid permit, and what I am going to do with that information will be determined by what happens in the next 30 minutes. Hosch said nothing. He held the permit. He looked at the permit. He looked at Reeves standing beside Marcus. He looked at Pell, who had taken 3 steps away from the situation and was studying the magnolia tree. He looked at the crowd of 51 people who were now assembled on the sidewalk. He handed the permit back to Marcus. He said nothing. He looked at the ground. He walked back to his patrol car. He sat in the patrol car. He did not drive away for 11 minutes. He sat there while the congregation set up the distribution table on the sidewalk. He sat there while the first community members came forward to receive their supplies. He sat there while Nathaniel Reeves and Harold Sims carried canned goods from the church foyer to the sidewalk. He sat there while Sister Mavis Tatum directed the setup with the authority of a woman who has been directing this setup for 11 years and requires no instruction. He sat there. Then he started the car and drove away. Nathaniel Reeves looked at Marcus. He said, "Are you all right?" Marcus said yes. He said it with the specific quiet of a man who has held a considerable amount of pressure in a controlled space for a considerable time and is now slowly and deliberately setting it down. He looked at Reeves. He said, "Thank you for being on this block this morning." Reeves said, "I walked past this corner every day for 14 years as mayor. I should have been here more often." Marcus said, "You are here now." Reeves said, "Let me help set up." Marcus said, "Canned goods on the left. Produce on the right if we have it. Personal care items in the center." Reeves said, "I know. I have been coming for 4 years." Marcus said, "You have." They set up the table together, 2 men of a certain age moving efficiently through a task they both knew how to do. The distribution ran from 10:13 to 11:57. 67 community members received supplies. 3 additional congregation members arrived with personal donations from the grocery store 3 blocks away when the table ran short. Harold Sims stayed until the end. He helped carry the empty boxes back inside. The crowd that had watched the entire exchange did not immediately disperse after Hosch's patrol car pulled away from the curb. They stood for a while on the sidewalk, some of them talking quietly to each other, some of them still watching the steps. Some of them simply present in the way that people are present after they have witnessed something they will carry. Sister Mavis said, "All right, we have work to do," and that broke the stillness. People began moving toward the table. Marcus stood on the steps of his church for 4 minutes after Hosch drove away. He did not say anything. The congregation members who were setting up the table moved around him gently with the specific care that people apply to someone who has just been through something that requires a moment while still having work to do. Sister Mavis handed him an empty cardboard box and said, "Reverend, this goes inside, and it was the right thing to give a person in that moment a simple task with a known end, a box that needed to go somewhere that was not here." He took the box. He went inside. He set it in the foyer. He went to his office. He sat at his desk for 7 minutes. He looked at the bottom drawer where the spiral notebook was. He did not open the drawer. He thought about what had just happened, and about what it meant, and about the specific form of institutional arrogance that it represented, the particular kind that is the most difficult to address because it is so ordinary, so procedurally wrapped, so practiced in the language of process, that it can look like diligence from a distance. He thought about his grandmother. He thought about what she would have said sitting in the 3rd pew if she had been able to see the steps this morning. He thought she would have said, "Now you handle it." He picked up the phone. He called Constance Bellard. She answered on the 2nd ring. He told her what had happened in order from the first ma'am through the handcuffs and through the removal. She said, "Where are you?" He said, "My office." She said, "Stay there, I am coming." She arrived at 10:51. She was 60 years old and had been practicing law in Cresswell for 34 years and had represented Marcus during the entire 4 years of the zoning dispute. And she came through the front door of the church with a notepad already open and a pen already in her hand, and she sat across from Marcus and took the account beginning to end without speaking, and then she sat with the account for 45 seconds, and then she said, "All right, here is what we do." The investigation into Officer Brendan Hosch was formally opened by the Cresswell Police Department's Internal Affairs Division within 48 hours of the incident. The opening was triggered by 3 concurrent submissions. The first was a formal complaint filed by Marcus Cole's attorney at 11:40 that morning, approximately 70 minutes after the handcuffs were removed. The complaint named Hosch specifically and cited unlawful detention misapplication of ordinance and excessive force in the form of unwarranted physical restraint. The attorney, a woman named Constance Bellard, who had represented Marcus during the zoning dispute and who had picked up the phone at 10:32 when Marcus called her from the church steps, had the complaint prepared and submitted before noon. The second was a written request from Harold Sims, submitted at 2:40 that afternoon, formally requesting that Internal Affairs review the application of Chapter 4, Section 12 to a permitted food pantry distribution operating on private church property, with specific reference to the permit record that his office held, and that Hosch had misrepresented in conducting the detention. The third was the recording. Janelle Watkins had recorded 14 minutes and 17 seconds of continuous footage from the moment Hosch told her to put the phone down through the departure of Hosch's patrol car. The recording contained the full exchange, including the ordinance citation, and Marcus's response, the handcuff application, and Marcus's statement that every word spoken here has been recorded, Nathaniel Reeves arriving and saying, "Remove the handcuffs," and Pell moving before the sentence was finished. She had shared the recording with 2 local media outlets at noon. The Creswell Courier ran the story at 2:15 that afternoon under the headline, "Pastor Handcuffed on Own Church Steps During Community Food Distribution." The story was shared 6,200 times on social media in the first 18 hours. The mayor's office issued a statement at 4:30 that afternoon. It said that the incident had been referred to Internal Affairs, and that the city of Creswell was committed to community trust, and that Reverend Marcus Cole had served the community for 19 years, and that Calvary Cross Baptist Church's food pantry program was an essential community resource that had distributed to more than 12,000 community members since 2012. The statement was 4 paragraphs long. Nathaniel Reeves did not think it was sufficient. He gave an interview to the Courier at 9 the following morning. He said that he had been present on Burden Street and had watched the entire incident, and that what he had witnessed was the unlawful detention of a minister on the steps of his own church under a valid permit by an officer who had been informed of the permit's validity and had proceeded anyway. He said that he had known Marcus Cole for 30 years, and that what he had seen Marcus do on those steps, the way Marcus had stood and spoken and not resisted, and looked at the magnolia tree, was the same thing he had seen Marcus do through 4 years of a zoning dispute and 2 floods and a fire, and 19 years of Third Thursdays. He said, "What you learn about a person in a situation they did not cause is more than what you learn from a resume." He said it slowly for the record. Chief Morales convened the review board within 72 hours. Hosch was suspended with pay pending the review outcome. Officer Derek Pell cooperated fully with Internal Affairs. His account corroborated the recording and confirmed that he had recognized the lack of legal basis for the ordinance citation within 3 minutes of arriving and had not acted on that recognition. He stated that in retrospect he should have acted. The review board's findings were issued in 8 weeks. The board convened on 3 separate days, taking testimony from 6 witnesses, including Harold Sims, Nathaniel Reeves Officer Pell, and Janelle Watkins, whose recording was played in its entirety at the opening of the first session. The recording ran 14 minutes and 17 seconds. The board listened to all of it without interruption. Hosch was found to have committed 3 violations: unlawful use of detention authority, misapplication of ordinance, and failure to de-escalate a non-threatening situation. He was suspended without pay for 45 days and required to complete specific additional training in municipal ordinance application before returning to active duty. The board noted in its written findings that the ordinance section cited by Hosch had never in the 12-year history of its existence in the Creswell Municipal Code been applied to a nonprofit community organization on private property, and that a basic review of the code's plain language would have made its inapplicability apparent. Pell received a written reprimand for failure to intervene when the basis for Hosch's action was, in Pell's own words, apparent to him within 3 minutes of arriving on scene. The complaint filed by Constance Bellard on Marcus's behalf was entered into Hosch's personnel record. The 2 prior complaints from black residents, which had been classified as inconclusive and closed without action, were re-examined in light of the current finding. The review board's note to the file stated that the pattern they constituted, considered together with the current incident, indicated a need for additional supervisory oversight of Hosch's community-facing work upon his return to duty. Marcus attended none of the proceedings. He had told Constance when she asked him whether he wanted to attend the review board hearings that he would be at the church on the third Thursday and wherever the work of the congregation took him, and that the proceedings could proceed without him because the record was in the recording and the recording was sufficient, and everything beyond that was institutional machinery that did not require his presence to function correctly. He attended the church. He attended the community. He attended on the third Thursday of November the food pantry distribution on Burden Street. He had the table set up by 9:58. He had Sister Mavis on his left and Janelle on his right, and Harold Sims 3 places down the table, who had brought 3 extra bags that month, and he had 67 community members who came specifically because they had read the story in the Courier and wanted to be present to stand on this sidewalk on this third Thursday, to make the number larger than it had been before, to be a body on a corner that was worth having a body on. The table ran out of supplies at 11:40. 3 congregation members left and went to the grocery store and came back with what they could carry. Marcus was still there at noon. He helped break down the table and carry the empty boxes inside. He stood for a moment in the front doorway. The October light, the November light, now lower and cleaner than October, came across Burden Street, at the angle that this time of year has the angle that makes old blocks look exactly as old as they are, all the history visible in the light. He thought of his grandmother walking this block for 27 years. He thought of the registry in the glass case in the foyer and the names written in the brown ink of time. He thought of Nathaniel Reeves stepping to the top of the steps and standing beside him, not in front of him, not speaking for him, beside him. The specific message of that positioning, which was not a rescue but a witness, not a correction but a presence, which said, "You are not alone," and which meant something different from "I am here to fix this." He went to his office. He opened the bottom drawer. He took out the spiral notebook. He did not open it. He held it in both hands and looked at the cover and thought about the 12 pages inside it and the 14 revisions and his grandmother in the third pew. He put it back. He sat for a while in the quiet of the office. Marcus stood for a long time in his office that November afternoon after the distribution. He thought about the review board and about what its findings would be and about whether the findings would change the thing that Hosch had learned to believe about himself and his methods. He thought the findings would be consequential. He thought the findings might not be sufficient. He thought that what Constance Bellard had told him about the pattern in the file, the 3 complaints, the 2 black residents, the classification of inconclusive, might, in the end, be the more important record. He thought about the teenager who had been stopped and questioned on the walk home from school. He did not know the family. He would have known them if they had come to him. He thought he should find them. He thought that the family of a child who had been stopped on a public sidewalk for walking home was exactly the kind of family this congregation existed to know. He made a note in the spiral notebook. Not the first sermon. A different notebook. The one he kept on his desk. The note said, "Find the Burden Street family. Invite them to third Thursday." He closed the notebook. He thought about Nathaniel Reeves standing beside him on the top step. Not in front of him. Beside him. He thought about what that specific positioning communicated about the message that is sent by standing next to someone rather than in front of them, about how the people who have the most to offer often make themselves most useful by not making themselves the center. He thought that was what dignity looked like from the outside. He thought he would use it in a sermon. He opened the bottom drawer. He took out the first notebook, the one with the 12 pages and the 14 revisions and the first sermon. He held it in his hands for a while before he opened it. He thought about what the 14 revisions had taught him, that the thing you are trying to say is always there before you find the words for it, and that the finding of the words is not the creation of the thing, but simply the act of learning to hold it clearly enough to pass it to someone else. He had been passing it for 19 years. He opened it to the last page. He wrote, "The cornerstone is not the stone. It is the decision to lay it. The decision is the weight that holds everything above it." He looked at the sentence. He thought it was right. He closed the notebook. He put it back. He sat for a while in the quiet of his office in the building that had been built on the decision of people whose names were written in ink that had been placed in a glass case in the foyer. And he let the quiet hold him for a while. The way the building held the corner, the way the corner held the block, the way the block held the neighborhood. He sat. The November light was at its late angle, long and low across the floor of his office, the kind of light that arrives in Louisiana in the third month of autumn, when the heat has finally resolved itself into something livable, and the trees on Burden Street have begun to release their leaves in small, unhurried increments. He listened to the light. The November light was at its late angle, long and low across the floor of his office, the kind of light that arrives in Louisiana in the third month of autumn, when the heat has finally resolved itself into something livable, and the trees on Burden Street have begun to release their leaves in small, unhurried increments. He listened to the light. There are corners that people decide to hold, not because the corners are strategic or convenient, but because someone once stood at the corner and looked at it and said, "This is where we are," and the saying of it became the holding of it, and the holding of it across years became the foundation, and the foundation became the building, and the building became the registry, with the names in brown ink, and the registry became the weight that an officer with a citation form cannot move. The corners that have been decided do not need a sign. The people who belong there know where they are. And on the third Thursday, when the table goes up at 10 and comes down at noon, the people who need to find it find their way to Burden Street and 19th Avenue, and they know, even if they could not have said exactly why, they know that what they are receiving is not only what is on the table, it is what the table has been held in place by. If this story held something for you, subscribe our channel. We tell the stories of people who decided to hold a corner and held it across decades, and did not move when someone arrived and told them to move, and the stories of the witnesses who understood what standing beside someone means, and the stories of the third Thursdays that kept happening no matter what the week before had been. We tell these stories because the people they happen to deserve to be known not only by the record of what was done to them, but by the record of what they built before any of it began and what they returned to building when it was over.